Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and today I wanted to share with you how I've been working with the Future Ancestor Tarot. So I have been working with this particular deck for over a month now, and I just wanted to kind of share a little bit about how I found working with it. Plus, I wanted to do a sort of proper walkthrough because I have yet to actually show all the cards in this beautiful deck on my channel. So we're gonna go ahead and do a walkthrough first, and then I'll kind of share with you how I found my experiences working with this particular deck. So before we jump in, I just thought I would share with you a little bit from the little pamphlet. This deck does come in a tuck box, but I no longer have that tuck box. I'll try to insert a picture of it here so you can see what it looks like. I don't have the tuck box anymore because I made a bag for it, as I normally do with my decks that come in tuck boxes. So one of the really interesting things about this deck is that it was created by Lexa Luna Studio, and it says, during a period of deep grief, Alexa embarked on a journey of healing through the creation of this body of work. Each card was collaged using Sumi ink and pieces of nature that surround her home in Seattle, Washington. These cards are a gentle reminder to live in gratitude for the steps our ancestors took to get us to where we are here and now. And then she talks about how this tarot deck is dedicated to her late grandfathers. So I wanted to just kind of point that out first because it is a really lovely dedication for this deck. And I do find that that healing energy really does flow through these cards. But I do find this deck is really well suited for kind of gentleness and compassion and healing readings. So before we jump into, talking about how I've been working with this deck, I do want to share a proper walkthrough of it and share all the cards and kind of some of my thoughts and impressions on them all. I am also going to read from the little pamphlet because I think that the write-ups in here are actually quite wonderful. So let's go ahead and jump into this deck. So here we have our beautiful Fool card, which says, your ancestors have paved the way, dear one. It's time to dive in. And I love this idea where we see the Fool not standing on the cliff about to dive in. We see this Fool in motion. They're already diving into the depths of this transformative journey that we're going to be going on. And I love that energy for the Fool. It is active. It is in progress. And I feel like we can step into that energy and kind of embody that forward motion of the Fool that we see depicted here. So here we have the Alchemist in place of our Magician, but you will see that the energy is still the same. It says, all the tools you need to create magic for yourself and your community are within reach. Use your power and energy wisely. Unlike some of our traditional Magician cards, we don't see the actual tools as in the, cup and pentacle and wand and sword laid out. We see the plants laid out, and I think that's really interesting because it really does tie into that idea of working in conjunction with nature. And I love that energy for the Magician, or in this case for the Alchemist. So here we have our stunning High Priestess card, which is one of my favorite cards in the deck. It says, trust your divine feminine wisdom. Your intuition knows the truth. I think that is very potent for the High Priestess. I love the idea that rather than being kind of stoically situated between the two pillars, we see this High Priestess again in motion, in action. She is actively tapping into her intuition. We see her eyes are closed, but her third eye is open. We do get the hints of the pillars here through the leaves, and we have the moon in the background. So I think that's a really lovely interpretation of the Priestess. And again, I love seeing the cards in action. So here we have our beautiful Empress, and it says, you are a deep well of warmth and love. Continue to nurture your sacred magic. So in this card, we definitely get kind of that mother energy that we see sometimes come through the Empress, but I do love that it is talking about kind of mothering yourself, cultivating your own sacred magic, maybe that magic that we unlocked in the High Priestess. I think that's quite lovely. So here we have our Emperor card, which says, you know that structure and boundaries have the power to turn dreams into reality, planting seeds for generations to come. So we have the figure here that's kind of like sitting almost at like a shop where we have all the items, all the elements together, but the idea that you can, put those structures and boundaries into place so that you can cultivate what it is that you are trying to create here. And I do like that idea for the Emperor. So in place of the Hierophant, we have Virtue. And it says, reflect on the lessons, rituals, and support that has shaped who you are today and what lessons you will continue to teach moving forward. So in this card, we're definitely getting more of that teacher type vibe here, right? That sort of spiritual guidance that we see or that we try to pull out of our more traditional Hierophant, kind of looking at what you've learned and what you need to take with you to cultivate things moving forward. And I think that's quite lovely. So here we have our beautiful Lovers card. It says, call in love that lifts your spirits, a love that embraces all you are today and what you will grow to be. So in this Lovers card, we definitely see more of a, what I would say, consider a Two of Cups type of energy, but we could look at this as kind of tying in those two different aspects of self, the duality of self. Oftentimes in classical decks, the Lovers card is more representative of choice. I don't necessarily see that in this card, but I do love the idea that it's talking about, you know, what you are now and what you will grow to become, which is quite lovely. So here we have the Chariot card, and it says, with determination and drive, be brave in following your greatest dreams. So really tapping into that idea of kind of channeling your willpower here in the Chariot. We don't have any of the sort of traditional imagery. We have a lot more flow and movement in this Chariot card, which I quite enjoy. So here we have our Strength card, which is another one of my favorite cards in this deck. It says, your power lies in knowing what to call in and when to let go, even when it's hard. It's a really interesting depiction of strength. We have this figure here who's letting the bird go. You know, it kind of reminds me of that old saying, if you love something, set it free. If it comes back to you, it was meant to be. I think that that's a lovely energy for strength. Definitely speaking more to the channeling your inner strength versus conquering that kind of inner self that we tend to see in more traditional cards. So here we have our lovely Hermit. It says, allow your solitude and wise ancestors to be your teacher. I love this idea of the Hermit kind of as a teacher. We do often, I think, kind of think of the Hermit as ourselves, like we are the Hermit, we're going within. But here we see the Hermit kind of representative of the ancestors and them being your teachers and guides along the journey. So I think that's a really interesting depiction for the Hermit. So here we have our Wheel card, which says, honor life's sacred cycles. The only constant is change. And I do love that the Wheel card is created out of all the different leaves, that idea of nature changing. And we also see this figure here that looks like perhaps they are submerged in the water. We can see the head and maybe the hands and feet and the belly, and we definitely get this idea of motion and change, right? The wheel can keep turning, but if you're in the center, if you're solid and you're grounded and you're in the center of that wheel, you're going to stay pretty stable, which is really wonderful, I think, for the Wheel card. So here we have Justice, which says, all your actions have a ripple effect. Is your future and past self proud? So definitely looking at kind of karmic action here that we see often in the Justice card, which I quite like because that is definitely an association that I have with justice. So in place of our Hanged Man, we have Metamorphosis. It says, honor your slow growth. As uncomfortable as it may feel, a new perspective is necessary now. So this is really wonderful. We're not necessarily turning everything upside down in order to gain that new perspective. We've kind of gone within and we're ready to kind of re-emerge out of this new way of seeing. And I think that's a really interesting perspective. We can still get some of the kind of hangman energy here in this card because we have these leaves here that kind of look like they're hanging from this little vine or this line here, and we kind of see them hanging down. So even though our figure is right side up, we still get kind of that energy of the Hanged Man with those leaves kind of hanging downward, which I think is a really wonderful way to kind of tie both those energies in together, especially when we're looking at changing the names of some of the major arcana cards. So here we have Death with a time to pause and let go. Your sacred tears are watering new seeds. I love that line. And one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of read from the little pamphlet, because the write-ups are just beautiful. I love this idea of, you know, what you mourn now does bring new life, right? It'll bring new change. It'll bring new seeds. We definitely get the idea of kind of rebirth and transformation in this card, but also the idea that grief can create change as well So I think it's a really wonderful, powerful, and quite healing interpretation for the Death card. So here we have Temperance with seek moderation, extremes lead to imbalance and exhaustion. So a little less alchemy in this card, more speaking to the idea of balance and moderation. We can see that the figure has kind of the two leaves that they're balancing. We do kind of get that idea of the water still with this kind of watery line here, as well as this big watery swoop that we see behind her. So I think that's really lovely that it does pull in that idea of the water through that kind of symbolic imagery, but we also get the idea of inner balance because she has her eyes closed, she's maybe in meditation, and she's looking at keeping those things in balance, those different aspects of self. So here we have the Devil card, and it says you are on the path to liberation of both mind and spirit. Ignore all toxic influences that bring you down. This is a really interesting interpretation for the Devil. A little bit more on the kind of healing, maybe a little bit more on the less confronting side of the Devil, where we see kind of that release from the Devil after the fact, right? You're on the path of liberation. Again, we're looking at these cards in motion, which I think is really interesting. So this is like after we've already been freed from the Devil, we are moving on, we are flowing, we are moving into a better state of being, and we're rising above those things that try to continually pull us down. Really beautiful interpretation for the Devil. I do quite like it. Here we have the Tower card, which says take unforeseen change as an opportunity to evaluate what is and isn't working. Again, another really interesting depiction. We do see some of the kind of traditional tie-ins in this card. We have the lightning here, which is actually in the ground at her feet. And we have the water here at the bottom that we often see in the Tower card. But I love the idea that she's kind of in the tower. She's either following the path of the lightning, or with each step she takes, she's creating change, which is going to create new growth. And we do kind of get that sense of heaviness with the dark background. We have this kind of swooping back here. We have some drops, but again, we see this one little flower here hinting to that idea of growth that's going to come out of this change. So here we have the beautiful Star card, and it says, lungs filling with air, you are home. Feel hopeful, you are held. So this card is really speaking to the idea of you're kind of right where you need to be. And it's a little bit indicative of our traditional Fool card, which is quite interesting because here we see a figure that looks like almost like they're on a cliff. This could be some water down here. This could be maybe a rainbow in the background, and we definitely see the star up here. But if we're looking at it from a little bit more of a zoomed out kind of view, it looks a little bit like the Fool card has settled into this journey because they know they're right where they need to be, which I think is quite interesting. Like they're following their path. They know where they need to be. And another interesting thing here, if you compare the two, the flowers are the same. Those two lines almost match up, which is quite fascinating. I don't know if that was intentional or just something that I happened to notice, but I love the fact of it does to me feel like the Fool they're settling into their path. They know that they are on the right trajectory and they're going to keep moving forward because they're at home here. This is where they're supposed to be. So here we have the beautiful Moon card that says dance with your past and future ancestors. You are their wildest dreams. And I love this idea of tying ancestor energy into the moon, kind of bringing together all of those who've come before you. And I love that it says, you are their wildest dreams. So kind of celebrating the fact that you're here and that you are here in this existence, in this lifetime, and that you have the support of your ancestors with you. So here we have the Sun card, radiant and joyful, your light is contagious. Thank your ancestors and your journey into becoming your brightest self. So again, kind of stepping into that wholeness of who we are and really embodying it and enjoying it. And again, we see those same yellow flowers that we saw in the Star card and the Fool, which is quite lovely. So here we have Judgment, and it says, we are more than skin and bones. The truth lies in our spirit and magic. And again, this card to me becomes so much more powerful when we combine it with the words from the little fold out. That really speaks to the idea of kind of looking in that mirror and seeing what's reflected back to us, but seeing it from the inside out, knowing that we are more than just what we appear on the outside. And I think that's beautiful. Just a beautiful, healing, nurturing energy and message for Judgment. And finally, we have the World card, which says, feel the fullness of gratitude and lessons learned, time for a new journey. We've come through this progression, we've learned, we've grown, and now we're ready to move on to something new. And I love the fact that the world is being hugged by this figure here, but also kind of held up and embraced by these hands here. This idea of each generation supporting the world in the continued journey of our species. And I think that's really wonderful. So moving into our minor arcana, we have the candles standing in for our wands for matters of spirit and fire. And I'm going to move a little bit more quickly through these, just reading from the little pamphlet. So here we have the Ace of Candles with when inspiration hits, let it grow. The Two of Candles with how will you balance your passions now? Stay put or chase something new. Here we have our Three with embrace magical collaboration. Our Four of Candles with celebrate the power of stability in your creativity and passions. Our Five of Candles asks, are you fighting to compete or is this a chance to call in diversity? Here we have our Six of Candles with soak in your recognition and success, but don't forget those who lift you up. Here we have our Seven of Candles with protect yourself and your creativity. Our Eight of Candles, your passions and creations will propel you forward. Here we have our Nine with set strong boundaries and cut cords in order to protect your spirit now. Our Ten of Candles reminds us to examine the burdens you carry. Can you get help in carrying the load? For our court cards, we have student, explorer, listener, and maker. So our student, which would be our page in our traditional deck, says time to listen to the teachings of sacred creativity with an open mind. Here we have our explorer with impulsive actions might get you burned. Time to choose adventure. Our listener of candles is sensual and creative. You know how to be a magnet for your desires. And finally, our maker of candles, time to actualize your desires through intention, planning, and action. Next, we have our Suit of Cups for matters of heart and water. Our Ace of Cups says give yourself permission to fall in love with yourself and others. Our Two of Cups is romantic or platonic. A sacred partnership must be honored. Our Three of Cups reminds us to praise your friendships that are most tender, reciprocal, and loving. Here we have our Four of Cups, which says break from the crowd and tend to your own energy without distraction. Our Five of Cups reminds us that all is not lost, just open your eyes. Our Six of Cups reminds you that your inner child needs you now. Here we have our Seven with beware of getting lost in dreams. With many options, focus on what calls your heart the most. Here we have our Eight of Cups with time to walk away from what is no longer serving you. Our Nine of Cups asks what loving action can you do for yourself today? Take good care. Here we have our Ten of Cups with honor your familiar relationships. Here we have our Student of Cups with be open and curious in love. Our Explorer says take brave action in what your heart desires now. Our Listener of Cups is sensitive and compassionate. Your magic is in the way you listen and care. And our Maker of Cups is the master of emotions. You know when to let go and learn from mistakes. So moving into our Suit of Needles, standing in for our swords, we have matters of the mind and air. Our Ace of Needles asks, what new story are you ready to tell? Control your own narrative. For our Two, we have face your truths. Your problems won't go away through avoidance. Here we have our Three of Needles with time will help heal you, dear one. Just like seasons, your pain will pass. Here we have our Four of Needles with time for rest and a reminder to quiet the mind. Our Five asks, where or from who do you feel the most pressure? How can it be released? Our Six of Needles says time to move forward and leave your past baggage behind. Our Seven of Needles reminds us to be careful not to betray others with lies and assumptions. Our Eight of Needles asks, are you a prisoner of your own thoughts, and how can we release you? Our Nine says your fears and overwhelming thoughts may feel unbearable, but time will heal. Our Ten of Needles says mental exhaustion harms more than just the mind. Time for reevaluation. Our Student of Needles seeks new and fresh knowledge. Our Explorer says let your intellect and drive motivate your actions now. Our Listener of Needles reminds you that as the seeker of truth, you are not swayed by biased or fading emotions. And our Maker of Needles reminds you to stitch together your story with confidence, clarity, and self-love. Standing in for our Pentacles, we have the Suit of Seeds for matters of the body and earth. Our Ace of Seeds reminds you to embrace your moment for growth. The Two of Seeds, seek balance doing what you love. Our Three of Seeds says combining efforts with others will lead to beautiful outcomes. Our Four of Seeds reminds you to seek stability by getting creative. Our Five reminds us that community care and self-care are at utmost importance now. Our Six of Seeds says make your ancestors proud by sharing your wealth, energy, and time. Our Seven asks, are you happy tending the garden you planted, or is it time to let go? Our Eight of Seeds reminds you that the work you're doing is paying off for you and also for your community. The Nine of Seeds says you are home. Honor the richness of life. Thank your body and ancestors. Our Ten of Seeds says listen and learn from the stories of elders. What stories will you pass to? Our Student of Seeds says to learn from the stories of the earth and seek inspiration from it. Our Explorer of Seeds reminds us to move confidently toward your physical and spiritual goals. Our Listener of Seeds says to care for yourself and your surroundings. Listen to your needs. And finally, our Maker of Seeds says, like the earth, you know how to give and care for your loved ones. So I think this is a really interesting, unique deck. We do have a lot of tie-ins to our traditional Waite-Smith structure that we can see in a lot of the cards, but there's also a very numerological and elemental bent to these cards as well, which I really appreciate. And we can see that in some of the cards, we can still pick up that energy like we see here in the Six of Cups. We could still definitely read this as nostalgia, but in the guidebook, the author speaks to your inner child, which I think is really wonderful. Kind of looking at this deck from a more personal perspective, I feel like this is a wonderful deck for reading for yourself, a wonderful deck for self-care and healing, which I think really was the creator's intention within creating this particular deck. And I do really appreciate the court cards in this deck, that we have the Student for the Page. I think that's wonderful, that idea of kind of learning your new lessons. The Explorer for taking those lessons and putting them out into the world. You know, the Listener in place of the Queen, and the Maker in place of the King. Really that idea of kind of cultivating and of being a master of your inner self. I think those are wonderful titles to use for the court cards, and I really like those associations. I do want to note that I have edged this deck. It does not come edged like this. It comes just with your, typical raw edge. While we're talking about the cardstock, this is beautiful. I think it's Make Playing Card cardstock. I can't remember if this deck came from Make Playing Cards or it just feels like Make Playing Card cardstock, but it's fabulous. It has a wonderful bend to it. It's also got a linen texture to it. I don't know if it'll pick up in the light, but it shuffles beautifully. But I did just want to note, if you're catching those gray edges, that is something that I've done myself. Just in my general work with this deck. Also, as I mentioned, I've gotten rid of the tuck box and I made a bag for it because that's how I prefer to keep my decks. I do want to note that I keep this little pamphlet in here with the deck because I will show you here in a minute how I tend to work with this deck. But as you can see, the cardstock shuffles wonderfully. Beautiful riffle, beautiful bridge. I have no problems working with this deck. It is standard tarot size, so it fits wonderfully in my hand. It overhands nicely. Just a real pleasure to work with tactilely. And it also has that kind of nice linen finish, so there's a little bit of texture to the cards as well. So let's talk a little bit about how I have been working with this deck, because a lot of the kind of little bits that I've pulled out of working with this deck actually come from working with the little pamphlet as well. And I do kind of feel like this pamphlet really does help to unlock a lot of the energy and the messages within these cards. You definitely do not need the pamphlet to read with this deck. You can read with this deck in a strictly Waite-Smith interpretation. You could read with it numerologically, or you can read with it kind of like I do, just a little bit of everything, kind of all rolled into one. I love that you can kind of pick out a card, and here we have our 8 of Needles, which would be our 8 of Swords. And we definitely get to that kind of the idea of all the swords, or in this case, needles, all around this person, and they're kind of sitting in this cage. But when we look at it in terms of the little book, it's asking you, is this a cage of your own making? Maybe that's something that you need to consider, something that you need to look at. So there's a couple of cards in here that I think I think the whole deck is wonderful. Let's just be honest. This is my actual working with this deck. So I'm going to be pretty biased because I do really, really love this deck. I really enjoy working with it. But here's one of the cards I wanted to speak about. So here we have our 3 of Needles, which would be our 3 of Swords. And I love that if you read a strictly Waite-Smith interpretation and you're looking for the 3 of Swords to represent that heartbreak, we still can pick that out of this card. We have this leaf here that is kind of a heart shape. We have this figure here who is crying. But the thing I love about this particular card, and one of the things that I think this deck does really well, is that we can also pull out a more sort of numerological elemental association within this image as well. So for me, 3 is a number of growth. The sword, or in this case, needles suit, would be the suit of the mind. And so when we put those together, we have growth of the mind. Now, sometimes growth does come from heartbreak. It does come from hard things, hard lessons learned. But I do like that we have this idea of the 3 needles are kind of over the head. So we can tie that back into the mind space. This can be the positive growth that comes out of that, or it can be the kind of hanging over our head heartbreak that we're still trapped in down here. And I think that's quite lovely. So just kind of one of the things that I wanted to point out about this deck, I do really like the way that the creator has interpreted the tarot, the 78 cards of the tarot. I think it's very smartly done. I love the kind of botanical elements. If you kind of work your way through the deck, you can make correlations between the colors and the plants that you see in here. As I pointed out with that star, the sun, and the Fool card, they all have that yellow flower on them. We can see it here again in the Ace of Seeds. So that's definitely something to look for. Another thing with a deck with a limited color palette is that the color becomes very apparent, and so it definitely draws your eye. And I think that's something to definitely keep in mind. The color in this deck is primarily coming through the botanicals, and so I love that it kind of has that idea of healing and growth underlaid in every single card, because every single card does feature a botanical of some sort. And so we kind of have that idea when we're looking at these cards on the whole. We kind of have this idea that no matter what card I pull out of here, there's going to be a botanical with a little pop of color that I can kind of pull that growth that's going to come out of the work being done from these particular cards. And I think that's quite lovely. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how I work with these cards in particular. One of the things that I love to do with this particular deck and a lot of my decks, let's just be honest, I love a 3-card reading. For me, a 3-card reading is kind of a staple. It takes care of just about anything. So what I have here is the Empress, the 10 of Cups, and the Listener of Needles. So if I'm doing this as a 3-card reading, what I like to do is to look at these cards and go, okay, first off, what does that kind of mean to me? And second off, what I want to do is look in this little pamphlet and I will string these together into a sentence. So the message will come through here. So if we have our Empress, it says, you are in a deep well of warmth and love. Continue to nurture your sacred magic. I love that line of continue to nurture your sacred magic. So I'm going to pull that message out of this card. We're going to have nurture your sacred magic. Then we're going to go to our 10 of Cups. And we're going to look at it. And it says, honor your familiar relationships. So nurture your sacred magic. Honor your family relationships. And then we have the Listener of Needles for the seeker of truth. You are not swayed by biases or feelings. So this is really wonderful in that it's kind of telling us, honor your sacred magic and honor your family, right? You still have to nurture yourself within your family construct. while you're taking care of your family, you still need to be taking care of yourself. And it's important to make sure that you're approaching things with that truth and understanding, and you're not letting emotion kind of cloud what's going on here or distract you from the things that you really need to do. So that would be my message, which actually comes from the little pamphlet, right? I've kind of strung each of those three thoughts together into one message. And then of course I will elaborate on that in terms of what does that mean to me for right now. So for me, this reading basically says, don't forget to take care of yourself when you're taking care of your family, and make sure you do so, you know, with coming from a place of clarity and understanding. This could totally be a personal reading for me. It could probably be a personal reading for a lot of us. And I think that that's one of the things that this deck really excels at, is really honing in on the things that we need to do to care for ourselves. So I thought I'd also share with you a couple of my favorite oracle decks to work with alongside the Future Ancestor Tarot. I think my favorite oracle deck to pair with it is the Roots and Wings Oracle. They have kind of a similar art style, but the Roots and Wings has a little bit more color to it, and that adds a nice kind of pop central focus when I put that in the middle of the two tarot cards. And I really love the way that it kind of creates a focal point for this reading. So here we're looking at hope with the 10 of Cups and the Listener of Seeds. So what do we need to cultivate hope? We need to pull in that family energy, and we really need to spend some time focusing in on what it is that we need to create. So I think the messages with these two decks are really spot on. I really enjoy working with them together. So here we have good fortune between the 10 of Seeds and the Ace of Candles. Artistically speaking, I think they go together wonderfully as well. But really, when we're looking at those messages, those really pop with these two particular decks. So here we have the Magician, right? Channeling all of your energy, and it is sitting as the focal point between the Ace of Cups and the Two of Candles. And look how beautiful they are together. We have Breathe between the 7 of Seeds and the Star. Gorgeous. We'll just do a couple more because I do have a couple other decks that I want to share. Here we have Grounded between the High Priestess and the 6 of Cups. Ground yourself in your intuition and your inner child. How beautiful is that? Find that balance between the two. Okay, we'll just do one more here. So we have Duality between the 8 of Seeds and the 9 of Needles. Beautiful. So another deck that I like to work with alongside the Future Ancestor Tarot is the Hedwig Botanical. This is a deck that I use quite often for a lot of different pairings. I love the minimal color palette, the line work, and it pairs beautifully with this deck because they have a really similar aesthetic. Again, you can pull out those where is the color, and that can be really telling. So here we have Caution between the Devil and Judgment. That is fantastic. Be cautious of not being dragged down by what's going on over here, and also keeping in mind that you need to look within, not just outside of yourself, for that validation that you're seeking. Quite beautiful. Here we have Ritual between the 10 of Needles and the 2 of Seeds. I think that these decks work beautifully together. Again, we have lots of white, lots of line work, and minimal color, which I think is really beautiful. So here we have Repel between the Maker of Seeds and the Alchemist. Gorgeous. And of course, the Hedwig Botanical has a wonderful guidebook. So if you dive into that, add that to what you find in here, you can get some really potent, powerful readings. Same with the Roots and Wings Oracle. It has a wonderful little pamphlet as well, and kind of combining all those messages together creates a really wonderful kind of takeaway message for your readings. So another oracle deck that I think pairs beautifully with the Future Ancestor is the Magical Herb Oracle. Again, they have kind of a similar color palette, similar aesthetic. Again, they kind of look like they are different art styles, but they're both mixed media collage, where we have different elements coming together from different mediums, and I think that actually makes them work quite well together. But the messages that come through with these two decks together is really wonderful. So here we have Healing between the Maker of Cups and the 9 of Cups. Beautiful. And again, I love that kind of subtle color palette that we're getting, and those pops of color that we're picking up through the botanicals is lovely. So we have Flow between the 3 of Seeds and the 4 of Seeds. That's interesting. So we have this community flowing into this stability. Lovely. Abundance between our Student of Needles and our Three of Cups. Attraction between our two explorers. That's interesting. Following the heart and soul here, they attract each other. So we're going out and following, you know, what our heart and soul wants us to do. That's quite beautiful. Here we have reflection between the Listener of Needles and the Three of Needles. That's quite powerful. We'll do one more. Purification between our Empress and our Lovers. Beautiful. So again, it's just a really gorgeous deck. There's a lot of really wonderful things going on within each of these cards. It's a very healing deck, a very nurturing deck, but I think it doesn't shy away from the shadow either. It definitely reminds us that there's growth that comes out of the hard things too, and I think that's really wonderful. I love how some of the cards are on these darker backgrounds. Some of them are on white. Some of them have a very gray background. And I think it makes for really interesting readings when you're looking at the different colors and the line work. And it really does add a whole nother layer to your readings, I think. But you can, of course, work with this deck in a very Waite-Smith style if that's your reading style, and it works quite beautifully for that. But there's a lot that I think that you can dive into and discover within these cards as well, particularly when you start pulling in the guidebook, maybe pulling in some other oracle decks. It really makes for some very rich, detailed readings. And I love that kind of at the end of it, it really does kind of coalesce into a beautiful healing message that you can kind of take and move forward with. Again, I love that a lot of the major arcana cards, we see them in motion. It's not so much about just embodying the energy, but it's about taking the energy and putting it out into the world, like going out and doing something with it, which I think is quite lovely. And again, it's just a beautiful deck. It's really simple, interesting illustrations. It definitely opens itself up to a lot of different interpretations, and we can kind of look at it, and looking at where the botanicals are can add a whole nother layer. Like here we have the Eight of Cups, you know, like she's walking away, but look at this big bloom of a leaf behind her. Like it's coming from her heart space. So she's walking away from all of this that no longer serves her to follow her heart. And that's really interesting because you can see this is just a botanical print. But when we layer it with the person over the top of it and they're walking away, you know, we can create this kind of new meaning that comes out of this kind of traditional imagery of a person walking away from cups. It's quite lovely to be able to, I think, dive deep into a deck like this. It's not a deck that I've seen around very often, and I, in fact, kind of stumbled upon it myself, but I am so glad that I brought it into my collection. It was kind of my birthday present to myself a couple months ago, and I've really enjoyed my work with it. It's definitely a deck that I will continue to work with, and I will continue to bring into my own personal path, particularly with healing work, particularly when I want to tap into the heart space. This is a beautiful deck for that. I think it's definitely a deck that you could use for grief work, being as that was kind of where this deck originated from the creator, and it was part of their grief process. So I feel like this would be a wonderful deck for that as well. But I feel like it works as a wonderful everyday deck for self. And I really think, again, that is where this deck shines, is kind of being a great way to get in touch with your own inner voice and the healing that you need to do on a personal level. I feel like this is the perfect deck for that. So again, that's how I've been working with the Future Ancestor Tarot. I have really enjoyed my work with it. It's definitely a deck that I will continue to work with for the foreseeable future, because there are so many wonderful things that I love about this deck, and it just works beautifully for the type of readings that I tend to do with it. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this deck, so please feel free to share with me in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.